In the modern era, it is easy to forget that downtown Los Angeles and suburban Tokyo are, at least for the time being, the exception and not the rule. We know less about many of the forests, deserts, and taiga on every continent than we do about the surface of the moon. This fact, coupled with the historically unfettered expansion of life on Earth, suggests the possibility of unknown creatures living outside the realm of human knowledge. Within the Congo River Basin, the dark lands of the African interior, between the Matumba Mountains and the borders of modern-day Gabon and Cameroon, sightings of strange, lumbering creatures have been rumored since the 1600s, natives relating local legends and histories to newly arriving Europeans. The first written record of such a creature, and first report of anything resembling physical evidence, occurred in 1776, when, while trekking through the Congo, French missionary Louvain Bonaventure Proyart and his party of wilderness explorers came upon a set of odd three-clawed footprints, estimated to be at least 3 feet in circumference. Quote, "The arrangement of the impressions indicated that the animal was walking, not running. The distance between the footprints measured 7 to 8 feet." Unquote. Oddly, Proyart's account is found within his writings directly between accurate descriptions of lions and elephants, the latter of which could not readily explain the strange tracks, as elephants do not have claws. Nearly a century and a half would pass before interest in the Congo once again fired the imagination of the Western world. The turn of the 20th century saw the genesis of what would ultimately become more than a dozen expeditions into the region, many of which were determined to find evidence of the mysterious creature originally reported by Proyart. In 1909, world-renowned zoo architect Carl Hagenbeck published an autobiography entitled Beasts and Men. In the book, Hagenbeck describes a strange animal, half elephant and half dragon, living in the wilderness of Rhodesia, modern-day Zimbabwe. To buttress this claim, Hagenbeck referred to a pair of independent sources, Joseph Menges, a naturalist famous for assisting in the exploration of the White Nile, and Hans Schomburg, a professional big-game hunter. While Menges only made a vague reference to some kind of dinosaur, seemingly akin to the Brontosaurus, Schomburg claimed that while traveling near Lake Bangweulu, there was a notable absence of hippopotami. This was later explained by local tribesmen as being the result of a strange creature that lived in the area, which drove the hippos away. Though Schomburg expressed doubts about these claims, likely from the complete non-existence of evidence connected to a large unknown animal, something one would expect an expert huntsman to be acutely aware of, Hagenbeck took the stories at more or less face value, and hastily undertook an expedition into the area. Almost at once, he found his efforts thwarted by disease and tribes of inhospitable pygmies. In spite of the ill-fated journey, specific descriptions of the unknown creature surfaced throughout the media, most of them reinforcing the image of a great sauropod. Not surprisingly, news agencies in Europe and America seized onto the newfound wonder of dinosaurs in Africa and a living prehistoric monster. The public's curiosity was further fueled by German explorer Paul Grotz, a contemporary of Hagenbeck who found himself obsessing over the mystery. Quote, "In the swamp lives the Nsanga, a degenerate saurian, which one might confuse with a crocodile, were it not that its skin has no scales, and its toes are armed with claws." Unquote. Grotz attempted to shoot an Nsanga, but was unsuccessful, though he later came upon some pieces of skin the animal had apparently molted or sloughed off. Unfortunately, he neglected to collect any samples for analysis. In his official report to the German government detailing a 1913 expedition through modern-day Cameroon, another explorer named Ludwig Freyr von Stein encountered stories of a reptilian very similar to the Nsanga, referred to by natives as Mokele Mbembe. A name from the Lingala tongue, Mokele Mbembe can actually be translated into English in several ways. The most common are one that stops the flow of rivers and eater of the tops of the palms. The term can also mean something as straightforward as monstrous animal or god beast. Based on the descriptions made by multiple independent sources, von Stein cobbled together what he deemed an accurate representation of appearance and habitat. Quote, The animal is said to be of a brownish-gray color with a smooth skin. Its size is approximately that of an elephant, at least that of a hippopotamus. It is said to have a long and very flexible neck, and only one tooth, but a very long one. Some say it is a horn. A few spoke about a long, muscular tail like that of an alligator. Canoes coming near it are said to be doomed. The animal is said to attack the vessels at once, and to kill the crews, but without eating the bodies. The creature is said to live in the caves that have been washed out by the river in the clay of its shores at sharp bends. It is said to climb the shores even at daytime in search of food. Its diet is said to be entirely vegetable. The preferred plant was shown to me. It is a kind of liana with large white blossoms, with a milky sap and apple-like fruits." Unquote. Von Stein further states that he was shown a path regularly used by the animal during its foraging. He notes that, although fresh, there were too many intermingled tracks from elephants, hippos, and other large mammals to make out anything with certainty. Understandably, European interest in Mokele Mbembe waned somewhat during the First World War, the reins of exploration primarily taken up by the United States in successive years. In 1920, the prestigious Smithsonian Institute sent a team of 32 men to the Congo region in hopes of settling the matter once and for all. Several strange anomalies were reported, such as multiple large, unexplained prints along a riverbank, and from an expanse of unexplored swampland, a host of strange, quote, roars which had no resemblance with any known animal, unquote. The expedition ultimately ended on a rather tragic note when, traveling by rail to a village purportedly filled with eyewitnesses, the team's train derailed, killing 4 men and seriously injuring 6 more. A dozen years later, eccentric biologist Ivan T. Sanderson encountered a series of animal tracks while traveling through the Congo, noting their similarity to hippopotamus tracks, though hippopotami did not live in the area. Sanderson also claimed to have heard and witnessed something near the shore of a lake. Quote, "The most terrifying sound I have ever heard, like an oncoming earthquake or an exploding nearby robot, suddenly greeting us from a large underwater cave. I don't know what we saw, but the animal, the monster, burned itself into my retinas. It looked like something that ought to have been dead millions of years ago. As a scientist, I should have been happy, of course, but this encounter was so frightening, so nasty, I never want to see it again." Unquote. Apparently not one to be taciturn, Sanderson's description of a noise like an exploding robot is likely meant to convey a metallic rumble, though how this would fit with something like a small sauropod is anyone's guess. Sanderson's encounter with Mokele Mbembe, or what he claimed natives called Mgbulu Mbembe, are somewhat hindered by hyperbolic tales of other sightings during the same trip, including the pterosaur-like Kongamato, which a more level-headed observer might interpret as simply an unusually large bat. 1972 and 1976 would see the next 2 attempts to locate Mokele Mbembe, both orchestrated by herpetologist James Powell. Powell's first hunt took him deep into the Congo wilderness, only to find tropical disease, poisonous snakebites, and little more than a handful of eyewitness anecdotes. The second attempt led Powell to the neighboring country of Gabon, following stories of the Jangonini, the Amali, and the Nyamala, all creatures the description of which closely matched that of Mokele Mbembe. Interestingly, when Powell showed natives several pictures of large, well-known African animals, along with a picture of a sauropod dinosaur, natives invariably indicated that the sauropod most closely resembled the elusive beast. Though it would not be the last time a search was mounted into the Congo, perhaps the most event-filled and colorful undertaking was that of Trace, the Regusters' African Congo expedition, in 1981. A brief 24-page investigative report was written by the expedition leader, Herman Regusters, and published by the California Institute of Technology the following year. A one-time engineer for the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, Regusters organized an expedition that included his wife, Kia Van Duzen, photographer Darby Switzer, and Kwabena Amenkwa, a naturalist from Ghana, ultimately venturing to Lake Tele, a large open expanse of water deep in the heart of the People's Republic of Congo. Surrounded by the dense Likawala swamp, Lake Tele only averages about 4 meters in depth, although it is quite turbid, completely opaque only a few centimeters below the surface due to the high amount of organic pollution. Despite its murk, the lake and its environs are teeming with a wide variety of aquatic life, insects, and crocodiles, and is a major source of fishing for members of the local Bangombe pygmies, who ply their trade at the water channels at the northern end of the lake. Regusters strongly believed that Lake Tele would be the most likely place to encounter Mokele Mbembe, as it was the locus of an oft-related and infamous story. Sometime between the late 1930s and 1960, sources vary on the exact year, Bangombe fishermen had become frustrated with a group of Mokele Mbembe entering the lake on a daily basis to forage, as the creatures repeatedly interrupted their work. As a remedy, the Bangombe erected a barrier of long wooden stakes to block off the entrance channel, and soon encountered a pair of the creatures trying to force their way through. The pygmies attacked the Mokele Mbembes with spears and killed one or two, again sources vary on this detail, after which they spent several days slaughtering the carcasses for meat. Supposedly, a great feast was held at the Bangombe Lodge, but whoever partook of the meat of Mokele Mbembe took ill and died soon after, adding even more of a frightening mystique to the rarely seen creatures. On the morning of October 29, 1981, a Congolese member of the expedition alerted the rest of the team to a long, neck-like object moving through the lake about 1.5 kilometers distant. Although few details could be made out apart from the object's dark color, the sighting was, quote, witnessed by every member of the scientific team, except for the photographer, unquote. The object submerged after about 5 minutes. 2 more sightings of a similar nature occurred on the lake on November 1st and 2nd, although there were fewer witnesses in each case, and oddly, once again did not involve the expedition's full-time photographer. On November 4th, while investigating the southwestern lobe of the lake, Regusters and his wife Kia reportedly heard an extraordinarily loud, deep-throated, trumpeting growl 40 or 50 meters away in a thicket, as well as the sounds of a large beast moving through the brush. Similar vocalizations were regularly heard by all members of the expedition during the remaining period of encampment, although it should be noted that their origin was never determined. About 3 weeks later at the north end of the lake, Kia had what was perhaps the fright of a lifetime when a 2-meter-long, serpent-like head and neck emerged from the water about 30 meters away from her boat. Quote, the broad neck tapered into a slender head. In the bright midday sun, its color appeared to be dark gray and its skin smooth. Unquote. Though the moment was understandably tense, the creature made no aggressive action as it made eye contact with the occupants of the boat, wavered its head to the side, and swiftly submerged back into the mirrored waters, never to be seen again. Mokele Mbembe is only one of an entire genre of dinosaur-like legends of the Congo, a very curious and perhaps telling fact. For example, in Gumamonene, the name meaning large python is usually described as a large lizard, often with a serrated dorsal sail. This sounds very much like a dimetrodon, a creature that, although often mistaken for a type of dinosaur, is actually a proto-mammal that predates the earliest dinosaurs by some 40 million years. Emela entuka, or the elephant killer, is supposedly large, stout, and horned, which sounds suspiciously like some sort of ceratopsian, or perhaps a rhinoceros, though rhinos are not typically found in the Congo Basin. And Mbilu, or the animal with planks growing out of its back, immediately brings to mind the favorite of childhood daydreaming, the Stegosaurus. Early dinosaur illustrations have been published since the middle of the 19th century. Imaginative and often dubious drawings of plesiosaurs, iguanodons, and four-legged monstrosities filled books that could very well have been among the personal possessions of contemporary European missionaries or explorers. The fact that natives in more recent years have identified a sauropod from a set of commonplace animals is at best weak evidence, mainly predicated on the idea that human beings are generally honest. Unwarranted cynicism aside, the fact that witnesses are not engaging in deliberate deception doesn't mean said witnesses are infallible. It is very difficult to discern objective observations from those observations colored by personal worldview. This is a universal human failing, independent of intelligence, culture, or background. Though a person's upbringing might shape the exact type of sighting, people will simply jump to whatever conclusion best fits their preconceptions. Commonly known animals are just that, common. Mokele Mbembe and other creatures of an otherworldly nature would catch the eye of anyone. Nothing remotely like a sauropod has existed for 65 million years, or so it is thought. If one is trying to convince an inquisitive foreigner of the existence of an animal unlike anything else, what better image to pick out of a lineup? Native-born stories of a large reptilian creature roughly the size of an elephant with a long neck have been related for at least a century, probably several. There is no reason to doubt the honesty of the storytellers, but it is possible that rather than a literal account of something in the area, the stories are nothing more than a reflection of religious animism. Mokele Mbembe may very well be a spiritual entity rather than a physical one, or it could be seen by natives as a physically real thing that remains hidden, a sort of biological dark matter. If a native child is told by every knowledgeable and trusted adult within a tribe that a large, horribly dangerous, strange animal lives on the opposite side of the lake, he or she would likely believe such a thing physically existed for the entirety of their life, even without any hard proof. Assuming for a moment the hunt for Mokele Mbembe is not simply a fool's errand, a few conclusions can be cobbled together from a century of hearsay. The shoulder height of an adult African elephant, the most likely known analog, is approximately 5.5 to 5.8 times the length of its hind footprint, accounting for variations in sex, idiosyncratic genetics, and a reasonable error in Abby Proyart's 18th century description, which mentions a clawed print 3 foot in circumference, or about 1 foot in diameter. This would place Mokele Mbembe, sans neck and head, between 5 and 6 feet in height at the shoulder, about as tall as an average man. Larger tracks have sometimes been reported, but always invariably with 3 clawed digits. This would seemingly discount an elephant, as they do not have claws, but it is worth noting that such reports would also seem to discount the traditional idea of a sauropod, as all known sauropods had 5 digits. Considering the length of stride, again based on Proyart's description, of about 7 to 8 feet, we can reasonably conclude the overall body length from tip of tail to nose to be about 21 to 24 feet, or about 7.5 meters, the stride being 1/3 of the overall size of a sauropod. The color of Mokele Mbembe has also been reported as reddish-brown, gray, dark brown, or a combination thereof. Although the creature has never been noted to possess body hair or fur, a cranial frill similar to the comb of a rooster has occasionally been reported. Depending on who is telling the story, the Mokele Mbembe may have a small single horn on its head, ironically making it a type of unicorn, and may or may not create a unique vocalization, Ivan Sanderson's colorful descriptions notwithstanding. Momentarily discounting some of the more bothersome bits of information, such as the oddly configured tracks and horn, Mokele Mbembe seems to be a dwarf version of the titanosaurs that roamed the Earth during the late Cretaceous, implying that the creature evolved into its present, more diminutive form. Whether this is the case or not, Mokele Mbembe's lineage is certainly ancient, as considering its saurian morphology, it is exceedingly unlikely, barring divine intervention, to have come into being after the dinosaurs disappeared. Perhaps the Mokele Mbembe only appears to be a sauropod and did not evolve from something larger. Perhaps its ancestors coexisted alongside the giant sauropods of prehistory rather than evolved from them. Known as living fossils, a very select group of organisms on Earth have shown virtually no change in form for the past several million years, sharing little to no genetic relationship to any other living organisms, essentially occupying their own neatly pruned branch on the evolutionary tree of life. Some widely regarded examples of living fossils include the nautilus, the aardvark, the red panda, the horseshoe crab, which has existed for nearly 500 million years and is actually not a crab at all, but distantly related to arachnids, and the coelacanth, a fish often used as an argument in support of Mokele Mbembe and other creatures seemingly displaced in time. Though coelacanths have existed in more or less present form for at least 400 million years, until a specimen was caught off the coast of South Africa in 1938, it had been commonly believed that they had gone extinct in the late Cretaceous period. While this does suggest the possibility of another equally ancient creature surviving into the modern age, the connection is fraught with problems. Despite defying the odds for the past 70 million years, the habitats of the coelacanth, the waters off the eastern coast of Africa and Indonesia, have remained essentially constant, the local environment changing at the not quite breakneck speed of continental drift. The Congo Basin, on the other hand, has undergone dramatic shifts in the same span of time. Seismic and climatological events, such as the eruption of the Toba supervolcano, cyclical ice ages, and the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction event, the asteroid impact currently believed to have occurred off the Yucatan Peninsula. How could a large sauropod like Mokele Mbembe survive the mass extinction of dinosaurs when every other species of any notable size was wiped out? The fact that a living coelacanth was only discovered fairly recently is understandable. The world's oceans are incomprehensibly vast, with nearly all of it hidden from human eyes. Of course, who's to say Mokele Mbembe had not been widely seen? Tribes of the Congo seem to have had plenty to report for the past 2 centuries. Surely their stories had some basis in reality, even if it were a misidentification. Actually, the idea that a small population of monsters, for lack of a better term, exist in the undeveloped regions of the Earth is not totally unreasonable, if perhaps a little far-fetched. To avoid inbreeding and reduced genetic drift, a population of at least 500 individuals would be necessary, according to a theory put forth by Australian geneticist Ian Franklin and American biologist Michael Soule, though this estimation is questioned by others in related fields. The government of the Republic of the Congo, the country currently associated with Lake Tele and the surrounding Likawala swamps, has officially estimated that approximately 140,000 square kilometers within its borders remain unexplored and unknown to anyone but local pygmies. This is roughly the size of the entire state of New York. A minimum viable population of even 10 times the number put forth by Franklin and Soule could easily be hidden among the giant trees and brackish waters covering an area of that size, just as a few buckets of golf balls could be scattered amidst the grasses of an overgrown meadow, and nary a passerby be the wiser. Then again, much of the Canadian North is unexplored and uninhabited, yet one would not expect to find woolly mammoths and short-faced bears traipsing across the tundra. An unknown does not necessitate the unexpected, any more than the pull of a slot machine handle necessitates a jackpot. Believers do have some valid points. The okapi and mountain gorilla of Central Africa were unknown until 1901 and 1902 respectively, and in the former's case, initial searches began with little more to go on than local stories and footprints. The expeditions of the Abbott Proyart, the Smithsonian and Herman Regusters all found large unexplained footprints, most of which were identified by knowledgeable individuals as positively not originating from elephants. However, none of the myriad expeditions into the region has led to any clear visual or audio recordings, suspiciously ambiguous videos aside. Even Mokele Mbembe's cryptid cousin in the Pacific Northwest has fared better in this regard. A larger-than-average soft-shelled turtle or a half-submerged elephant puttering through a lake 100 meters in the distance might be interpreted as something else to an observer taking a break from an arduous day in the jungle. None of this, of course, totally disproves anything, but the whole subject does seem a little hard to believe, considering the amount of time and money invested. The great intensity of exploration of the Congo throughout the 20th century is perhaps the best argument against any unknown sauropod. Well over 100 people have been involved in the hunt, most of which were financed by governments or research institutions. This is somewhat at odds with a 2010 study in which zoologists Diana Fisher and Simon Blomberg found that as many as 1/3 of all mammal species thought to be extinct have been rediscovered when purposeful searches were performed. The body size of the species in question seemed to be irrelevant, but the number of searches in any given area was important. Statistically, 1 or 2 searches for a species were not likely to bear fruit, 3 to 6 searches had a high rate of success, and anything beyond this number was of no benefit. Mokele Mbembe may of course be an outlier in this case, though after a while, hoping for a statistical anomaly does begin to resemble desperation. To be completely fair, the expectation of Mokele Mbembe to be a dinosaur is largely the invention of the early regional explorers and the journalistic sensationalism that followed. Though many of the later expeditions were financed with the express purpose of finding a sauropod-like creature, it's doubtful anyone involved actually expected to find a 70-million-year-old beast or one of its direct descendants. In the 21st century, the subject of Mokele Mbembe has been more or less co-opted by young Earth creationism, proponents arguing that a living dinosaur negates the validity of an ancient fossil record, and by extension, any theory of deep-time evolution. It is not the purview of this video to argue one way or another over the concept of biblical creationism, but it must be pointed out that there is no obvious reason a universal creator could not just as easily use evolution as a means to an end, rather than snapping his fingers to bring life forms into existence whole cloth. Modern fundamentalist undertones aside, as an endeavor, cryptozoology is by no means rigorously scientific, but as an intellectual pursuit, it is no more nonsensical than any other hobby, and is not as detached from the physical world as, say, something like psychokinesis. One can hardly create a plaster cast of a psychic impression, though in fairness, trace evidence can be faked or misinterpreted, and should not be viewed on par with experimental data. It is easy to dismiss cryptozoologists on the hunt for Mokele Mbembe as cranks and crackpots, but we should refrain from judging too quickly, as many of those involved have had significant scientific training and can hardly be considered unintelligent. It may also come as a surprise to some that indisputably legitimate scientific knowledge has been obtained from the search for Mokele Mbembe, ranging from the cartographic and biosampling to the discovery of unknown and decidedly less saurian species, such as the new type of crestless mangabey monkey found by creationist William Gibbons. To set out into such an inhospitable and remote part of the world takes an inordinate amount of courage, especially when the most one could be expected to receive for their efforts is the equivalent of a nice photograph or two, something that would give a sense of personal vindication, but nothing that would convince an ardent skeptic. Perhaps the best thing to be said about cryptozoology in general is it encapsulates the spirit of discovery, a drive all too lacking in today's world of easy stimuli and search engines. At the very least, those looking for Mokele Mbembe and strange beasts like it have shown themselves to be a genuinely curious lot, brimming with the same wonder for the natural world that most of us leave behind in childhood. A not altogether bad thing.